She poured his 500-a-bottle wine, and he didn't even look at her. To him, she was just a uniform, a pair of hands. To Alistair Covington, the ruthless billionaire who demolished dreams for a living, Ilara Vance was nothing. He was rude, demanding, and cruel. But when he insulted her one night, demanding she be fired, he sealed his own fate. Because Ilara wasn't just a waitress struggling to pay her mother's medical bills. She was the daughter he'd abandoned 20 years ago, and she was holding the one secret that could destroy his entire empire. The clinking of silver on bone china was the soundtrack of Ilara Vance's life. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound that set her teeth on edge. She navigated the floor of the Argent, downtown's most obscenely expensive restaurant, with a practiced grace that belied the aching in her feet and the anxiety coiled in her stomach. The Argent was a world of hushed tones, bespoke suits, and women who dripped diamonds like rainwater. Ilara, in her starched black uniform, was just part of the scenery. Her focus was laser-sharp. Table 4 needed water. Table 9 was ready for dessert menus. And Table 12, the best table in the house, was occupied by the man who single-handedly paid the restaurant's electricity bill, Alistair Covington. Covington was not just wealthy, he was a force of nature, a corporate titan who bought and sold city blocks like they were baseball cards. His company, Covington Global Properties, was a name spoken with equal parts reverence and fear. He had a face that looked like it was carved from granite, and eyes that assessed everything and everyone for its value. Tonight, he was in a particularly foul mood. "This," he said, holding up his wine glass without looking at Ilara, "is corked." Ilara paused. She had decanted the 1998 Chateau Margaux herself. "Sir, I checked the cork, and the aroma was—" "Are you contradicting me?" His voice was low, cutting through the restaurant's ambient hum. Heads didn't turn. People at the Argent were too polite for that, but a ripple of tension passed through the nearby tables. "Not at all, sir," Ilara said, keeping her voice perfectly level. "I am simply surprised. Would you like me to bring the sommelier?" "I want you to bring me a new bottle," he snapped. "And I want this one taken off my bill. The incompetence in this establishment is staggering." Ilara felt the familiar, hot prickle of anger behind her eyes. This man was worth billions. That bottle cost more than her month's rent. She thought of her mother, lying in a sterile room at St. Jude's Mercy Hospital, the bills piling up on their tiny kitchen table. She took a slow, deep breath. "Of course, Mr. Covington. Right away." She retrieved the bottle. As she turned, her wrist bumped the edge of his bread plate, rattling it slightly. Covington let out a sigh of exasperated disgust. "Clumsy. Utterly clumsy. You people are hired for your ability to walk and carry, and you can't even manage that. What is your name?" Ilara froze. This was it. A complaint from him meant a warning, or worse. "Vance, sir. Ilara Vance." He tasted the name, as if it were another sour wine. "Vance? Well, Miss Vance, you are precisely the kind of mediocrity I cannot abide." Something inside Ilara, a fragile thing that had been stretched thin by sleepless nights and mounting debt, finally snapped. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply met his gaze, a thing few employees ever dared to do. "I apologize if my presence is so offensive to you, Mr. Covington," she said, her voice quiet but vibrating with intensity. "I'll be sure to have my colleague Liam take over your table. Perhaps he will be less mediocre." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned on her heel and marched directly to the staff station, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alistair Covington watched her go. He wasn't angry anymore. He was intrigued. In his world, people either fawned or shattered. They begged, they grovelled, they pleaded. They did not, under any circumstances, speak back. He drummed his fingers on the white linen, a strange, unreadable expression on his hard face. He had come here to finalize a hostile takeover of a rival firm. Instead, he found himself thinking about a waitress with tired eyes and a spine of steel. The small apartment Elara shared with her mother smelled of disinfectant and old photographs. Elara kicked off her sensible black shoes, her feet throbbing. She padded into the small bedroom where Laura Vance was sleeping. Laura had been a vibrant, beautiful woman. Now she was a pale sketch of her former self, lost in the depths of a debilitating neurological disease that had stolen her mobility and, increasingly, her memory. The medical bills were a mountain. Elara's waitressing job, even with the generous tips from the Argent, was a shovel against an avalanche. Elara checked the IV drip, a home setup she'd been trained to manage, and smoothed the blanket over her mother's frail form. "Elara." Laura's voice was a dry whisper. "I'm here, Mum." Elara forced a bright smile. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. The man came today." Elara's stomach dropped. "What man, Mum? The nurse?" "No, the cold one. From the bank." Laura's eyes, cloudy with medication, filled with a sudden, lucid terror. He said, "Final notice, Elara. We're going to lose this place." Elara's smile didn't just fade. It cracked. She had been intercepting those letters for weeks. "Don't you worry about that, Mum. You just rest. I have it handled. I promise." "You're a good daughter," Laura murmured, drifting back to sleep. Not like him. He was cold, too. So cold. Elara held her mother's hand until her own breathing evened out. The bank. The hospital. And now, the encounter with Covington. It felt like the walls were closing in. The next evening, Elara was back at the Argent. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, pulled her aside. "Elara, I need you to be on your best behavior tonight," he said, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Covington is back, and he specifically requested your section." A chill went down her spine. What? "He's at table 12, and he's not alone." Elara braced herself and walked out. Alistair Covington was indeed at his table, but this time he was accompanied by a young woman in a sharp, blood-red dress that probably cost more than Elara's car. This was Beatrice Sinclair, Covington's much younger, notoriously icy fiancée. Beatrice was a socialite, known for her brutal takedowns in the gossip columns and her position as head of the Covington Foundation, a charity that seemed to primarily fund art galleries she liked. Elara approached the table. "Mr. Covington, Mum, good evening." Alistair looked up, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Miss Vance, you're still here. Surprising. I'll have the usual." He didn't introduce Beatrice. Beatrice, however, was staring at Elara with open disdain. "Alistair, darling, is this the girl you mentioned? The one with the attitude?" "She's just a waitress, Beatrice," Alistair said, waving a dismissive hand. "Water," Beatrice snapped, holding her empty glass out without looking at Elara. "And make sure it's actually sparkling this time." The last glass was appallingly flat. For 2 hours, Elara endured a masterclass in humiliation. Beatrice sent back her salad twice, once because the lettuce was too green, and once because it was too pale. She spoke about Elara as if she weren't there. "It's just so difficult to find good help, isn't it?" Beatrice sighed to Alistair. "They have no polish, no sense of decorum. Look at her. That uniform is positively tragic." Elara's hands were shaking as she cleared the plates. "Oh, and dear," Beatrice called out as Elara was walking away. "You have something right here." She pointed to her own flawless cheek. Ilara instinctively touched her face. "I'm sorry?" "A blemish," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You really should look into a better skincare regimen. It's so distracting." The entire restaurant could hear. Ilara felt the blood rush to her face. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to throw the tray of plates directly at Beatrice's perfectly coiffed head. Alistair Covington just watched, his expression unreadable. He didn't defend Ilara. He didn't silence his fiancée. He just observed. He observed as Beatrice tore strips off this young woman, and he observed as Ilara, biting her lip so hard it nearly bled, simply nodded. "I'll see to that, ma'am," Ilara whispered, and fled to the kitchen. Her friend Liam, another waiter, caught her arm. "Hey, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet." "I can't do this, Liam," she gasped, leaning against the steel counter. "I can't. They're monsters." "I know," he said grimly. "Covington is a shark, and he's engaged to a piranha. Just ignore them. It's just a job." "It's not just a job," Ilara said, her voice breaking. "It's my mother's life." When she went back out to drop the check, Alistair was alone. Beatrice was, presumably, in the powder room. He signed the slip, adding a tip so obscenely large it felt more like an insult than a kindness. As he stood, he paused. "My fiancée," he said, his voice low, "finds you unprofessional. She believes you are a liability to the restaurant's brand." Ilara gripped the leather check presenter. "I have done nothing but my job, sir." "Your job," Alistair countered, "is to be invisible, to make the patrons feel comfortable. My fiancée does not feel comfortable. She feels you are insolent, and I'm beginning to agree." He leaned in, his expensive cologne washing over her. "A word of advice, Miss Vance. People like you, you're replaceable. Remember that." He turned and left, leaving Ilara standing in the center of the opulent dining room, feeling smaller and more invisible than she ever had in her life. The next day, Ilara was called into Mr. Henderson's office before her shift. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what was coming. Mr. Henderson, usually a kind, bustling man, couldn't meet her eyes. He was shuffling papers on his desk. "Ilara," he began, "you've been with us for 3 years. You're one of my best. You know that, right?" "I do, sir," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The restaurant business. It's a fickle thing," he hedged, clearly dreading this. "We rely on our patrons, our major patrons." "Mr. Covington," Ilara stated. It wasn't a question. Henderson sighed, finally looking up. His eyes were full of pity. "Alistair Covington is not just a patron, Ilara. He's the primary investor in the hospitality group that owns the Argent. He's, for all intents and purposes, my boss. His boss." He slid an envelope across the desk. "He called me this morning. He and Miss Sinclair. They were extremely unhappy with your service. They used words like insolent, argumentative, and a threat to the clientele." "That's not true," Ilara cried, color flooding her cheeks. "Miss Sinclair, she was the one—" "It doesn't matter what's true," Henderson snapped, his own frustration boiling over. "It matters what Mr. Covington says is true. He gave me an ultimatum. Either you go, or he pulls his funding from our new expansion project. He'll ruin us, Ilara. He'll do it over a waitress, just to prove he can." The envelope contained her final paycheck, and 2 weeks' severance. It was a paltry sum, barely enough to cover a single one of her mother's prescription refills. I'm begging you, Mr. Henderson," Ilara whispered, the fight draining out of her. The humiliation from last night was nothing compared to the cold, stark terror she felt now. "My mother. She's very sick. I can't. I can't be without this job. I'll apologize. I'll scrub the floors. Please." Henderson looked ill. He was very specific. He said if he ever saw you in this building again, he would personally liquidate the entire franchise. "My hands are tied, Ilara. I'm so sorry." Ilara walked out of the restaurant in a daze. The bustling city streets felt distant and muffled. She had been fired, not for being bad at her job, but as a casual display of power by a man who wouldn't even remember her name in a week. She got home to find a new, bright red envelope taped to her apartment door. It wasn't from the bank. It was an eviction notice. They had 30 days. The severance pay, the bank notice, the firing. It all converged into a perfect storm of despair. She stumbled inside, her legs giving way. She slid down the front door and, for the first time in months, she put her head in her hands and wept. She cried for her job, for her mother, for the sheer, crushing injustice of it all. Alistair Covington had taken her livelihood as an afterthought. He had swatted her away like a fly. And in doing so, he had just signed her mother's death warrant. The next 2 weeks were a blur of beige waiting rooms and polite, devastating rejections. The high-end restaurants didn't want to hire someone who was fired from the Argent. The low-end diners didn't pay enough to even touch the interest on her debts. Ilara sold her car. She sold her grandmother's jewelry. She was running on fumes and cheap coffee. Worse, her mother was fading. Laura's moments of lucidity were becoming rarer, her body weaker. The hospice nurse, a kindly woman named Mrs. Petroff, had gently suggested it was time to prepare. One rainy afternoon, Ilara was sitting by Laura's bedside, trying to untangle a knot of medical tubing. It's in the box," Laura whispered suddenly, her eyes open and surprisingly clear. "What's in the box, Mom?" Ilara asked gently, playing along. "The hat box. In my closet. Get it, please." Curious, Ilara went to the cramped closet and pulled down a dusty, floral print hat box. Inside, beneath old, yellowed baby photos, was a small, tarnished silver locket shaped like a heart. It was broken. Only one half of the heart was there. "I wanted to give this to you," Laura said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "It was from him. Before." "From who, Mom?" Ilara had never been told anything about her father. It was a locked door, and Laura had always held the key. "Alistair," Laura breathed. The name was a curse and a prayer. Ilara froze. "What did you say?" "Alistair, your father." Laura's eyes were fixed on the past. He was brilliant and ambitious, like a fire, like you, Ilara. He burned so bright. He designed this, a locket, 2 halves, 2 parts of a whole, he said. Ilara's blood ran cold. "Alistair." "What? What was his last name, Mum?" He wouldn't like me talking about it," Laura fretted, her mind starting to cloud again. "He said I was a distraction, a complication. He had a family, a name to protect." "Mum, look at me." Ilara gripped her mother's hand, the silver locket cutting into her own palm. "What was his name?" "Covington," Laura whispered, and then her eyes rolled back. "Alistair Covington. He sent us away, said I'd ruin him. He kept the other half." Ilara staggered back, dropping the locket. It clattered to the wooden floor. It wasn't possible. It was a coincidence. A different Alistair Covington. It had to be. The man who had haunted her dreams, the monster who had destroyed her life. He couldn't be. She grabbed her laptop, her hands shaking so violently she could barely type. She searched Alistair Covington plus Laura. Nothing. Of course not. A man like that would have scrubbed the records. He would have buried his complications. But then she tried a different search. Alistair Covington, plus early life. An old society page from 25 years ago popped up. A grainy photo of a much younger Alistair, ruthless even then, standing next to a stunning, dark-haired woman at a university gala. The caption was blurry, but the woman, it was her mother. It was Laura Vance, vibrant and whole, looking at him with an adoration that shattered Ilara's heart. The man who had called her mediocre, who had her fired, who had insulted her and humiliated her. He was her father. The sickness rose in her throat. It wasn't just injustice anymore. It was a grotesque joke. The universe was laughing at her. She looked at the eviction notice on the table. She looked at her dying mother. And then she looked at the locket in her hand. The anger from the restaurant, the despair from the firing, it all crystallized into something new. Something hard and cold and sharp. It was rage. Ilara didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, the half-locket clutched in her hand, the laptop screen glowing with the face of the man who was her father. She watched interviews of him on YouTube, listened to his cold, calculating voice talk about market disruption and eliminating inefficiencies. He called people inefficiencies. He had called her mediocre. He had called her mother a complication. The next morning, she put on her only decent blazer, the one she wore to her interview at the Argent. She braided her hair back, tight and severe. She put the locket around her neck. She looked in the mirror. She didn't see a waitress. She saw the set of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. They were his. She took the subway to Midtown. Covington Global Properties was a spear of glass and steel thrusting into the Park Avenue sky. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silent, intimidating art. She walked up to the main reception desk, a slab of black granite, helmed by a woman who looked like a high-fashion android. "I'm here to see Alistair Covington," Ilara said. Her voice didn't shake. The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, it's a personal matter. Mr. Covington does not accept walk-ins for personal matters. You can send an email to his executive assistant." "I'm not leaving until I see him," Ilara said. The receptionist finally looked up, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call security." "Call them," Ilara said, crossing her arms. "Tell them Alistair Covington's daughter is here. See how that plays out in the lobby." The receptionist's eyes widened. This was not in her script. She quickly, silently, picked up her phone. Two broad-shouldered men in identical black suits materialized at Ilara's elbows. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." "Is he going to have me thrown out?" Ilara said, her voice ringing out in the silent lobby. "Just like he had me fired. Just like he threw out my mother." People were starting to look. This was a scene. This was bad for the brand. What is the meaning of this? A new voice, sharp and laced with venom, cut through the tension. Beatrice Sinclair was descending the grand staircase, dressed in a white power suit. She looked at Ilara as if she were a piece of trash that had blown in off the street. "Oh, it's you," Beatrice sneered. "The clumsy waitress. Are you here to beg for your job back? How pathetic. Security. Get her out." "I'm not here for my job," Ilara said, standing her ground as the guards gripped her arms. "I'm here for him." "He doesn't want to see you," Beatrice laughed. "No one does." "Ask him," Ilara challenged. "Ask him if he wants to see Laura Vance's daughter." Beatrice's smile faltered. The name Laura Vance clearly meant nothing to her, but the sheer, unadulterated confidence in Ilara's voice gave her pause. What nonsense are you spouting?" "She's raving, Mom," one of the guards said, pulling Ilara's arm. "Let her go." The voice came from the top of the stairs. Alistair Covington stood there, his face like a thundercloud. He had clearly heard the commotion. "Alistair, darling," Beatrice cooed. "This filth is causing a scene. She's claiming to be your... Well, it's ridiculous. The guards are handling it." Alistair descended the stairs, his eyes locked on Ilara. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated loathing. "I told you to never come near my property again. I had you fired. What more do you want? Money? Is that it? Are you trying to blackmail me?" "I'm not here for blackmail," Ilara said, yanking her arm free from the guard. She walked right up to him, close enough to see the tiny lines around his cold eyes. "I'm here," she said, her voice shaking but full of power, "to show you what you threw away." She ripped the chain from her neck. The half locket fell into her palm. She shoved her hand under his nose. "You gave this to Laura Vance," she hissed. "My mother. You told her you were 2 parts of a whole, and then you threw her out with me in her belly because we were a complication." The entire lobby, the guards, the receptionist, Beatrice, and a dozen junior executives, was frozen. Alistair Covington's face, for the first time since Ilara had met him, went completely, terrifyingly blank. The blood drained from it. He didn't look at Ilara. He stared at the small, tarnished piece of silver in her hand. His voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you get that?" "She's dying," Ilara said, the tears she had refused to shed finally welling up, hot and angry. "In a hospice, because I couldn't pay her bills, because I lost my job, because you had me fired, you... She couldn't say the word. Beatrice, seeing the look on Alistair's face, panicked. "Alistair, this is absurd. It's a shakedown. It's a cheap trick." Alistair didn't hear her. He reached into his own pocket, his hand shaking. He never went anywhere without his keys. And on that keychain, nestled between the key to his penthouse and the key to his vintage Bentley, was the other half of the locket. It was pristine, polished, and identical. He held it up next to the one in Ilara's hand. They clicked together, a perfect, unbroken heart. Beatrice Sinclair let out a small, strangled gasp. Alistair Covington looked up from the locket and truly saw Ilara for the first time. He saw her high cheekbones, her stubborn jaw, and the familiar, fiery eyes that now stared back at him, not with insolence, but with pure, devastating judgment. "My office," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now." The private elevator ride to the penthouse office was a journey in a soundless glass and steel prison. Ilara's feet were planted on the plush, custom-woven carpet, but she felt like she was floating in an icy void. Alistair hadn't spoken a single word since breathing. "My office." The 2 security guards who had entered the elevator with them, a protocol for any unsecured guest, stood stiffly, their eyes fixed on the doors, their very presence radiating a new, terrified respect. They hadn't been protecting Mr. Covington from this woman. They had been manhandling his daughter. The elevator doors didn't open into a reception area. They opened directly into the office itself. The room was less an office and more a statement of absolute dominion. It was a vast, minimalist expanse of glass, chrome, and obsidian black marble. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a 180-degree, godlike view of the city. The entire world was laid out below them, a map of tiny, insignificant lives. In the center of the room sat a single, enormous desk, as black and imposing as a sacrificial altar. Ilara walked into the center of the room and stopped, refusing to be intimidated by the scale of it. She was a speck, but she was a speck of iron, and she would not be moved. Alistair rounded the desk, a path he had walked 10,000 times. It was a reflex. He sank into his high-backed leather chair. He was on his throne, but the power had evaporated. His hand, which was still shaking, opened. The two halves of the locket, his polished, hidden-away half, and her tarnished, worn half, clattered onto the gleaming black surface. The tiny metallic sound was like a gunshot in the vast, hushed room. He stared at the completed heart, this tiny $30 piece of silver, as if it were a bomb. For a full minute, the only sound was the whisper of the high-tech air filtration. Finally, Alistair raised his head. He didn't look at Alara. He looked at the view. "Where?" he asked, his voice a dry, hoarse rasp. "Is she?" He didn't need to say her name. There was only one she in the room. "St. Jude's Mercy Hospice," Alara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the emotion she'd shown in the lobby. She was running on a cold, pure adrenaline. The one on Maple Street, not one of the ones you put your name on. Alistair flinched, a small, involuntary movement. Hospice? The word hung in the air. Hospice was not a place for recovery. It was a place for endings. "For how long?" he whispered. "She's been sick for 5 years," Alara said, the words coming out like chips of ice. "A degenerative nerve disease. She's been in the hospice for 3 months. We have been handling it. Until I couldn't." The unspoken accusation, "until you had me fired," was so loud it was almost a scream. "Alistair, that is enough." The elevator doors hissed open again, and Beatrice Sinclair stormed into the room. Her face, which had been a mask of shock in the lobby, was now set in a mask of controlled, icy fury. She had had 2 minutes in the elevator to recalibrate, to assess the damage, and to move into containment mode. "Alistair, darling," she said, her voice dangerously smooth as she strode toward the desk, ignoring Alara completely. "This performance is over. You have a board meeting in less than an hour. The Sinclair Merger Committee is—" "Beatrice," Alistair said, his voice still hollow. "Be quiet." Beatrice stopped, as if she'd hit an invisible wall. In their entire relationship, he had never, ever spoken to her with anything less than cool, transactional courtesy. What did you say to me?" "I said," Alistair repeated, slowly lifting his gaze from the locket to his fiancée. "Be quiet." He then turned his full attention to Alara, and for the first time, he looked at her. He saw past the waitress uniform he'd first seen her in. He saw the high, stubborn cheekbones. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw the shape of her eyes that were currently staring back at him, not with fear, but with a pure, unwavering judgment. "You," he breathed, a look of dazed, horrified wonder on his face. You have her eyes." "Alistair!" Beatrice shrieked, her control finally snapping. "You cannot possibly be entertaining this. It's a grift, the oldest, cheapest trick in the book. She's a common, clumsy waitress. She probably Googled your past, found some old story, had a duplicate, trinket, made at a pawn shop." She advanced on Alara, her polished red fingernails pointing like a claw. "How much do you want? Is that it? 100,000? Is that what your pathetic little sob story is worth? Name your price, you little grifter, and then get out." Alara didn't even look at her. She kept her eyes locked on Alistair. "Tell her," Alara commanded, her voice low. "Tell her if it's a trick." Alistair looked at the locket. He looked at Beatrice, this perfect, pedigreed woman who represented his entire world, the world of mergers and contracts and social armor. Then he looked at Alara, the daughter he had sentenced to a life of struggle. The choice was made. "Beatrice," Alistair said, his voice quiet. I was 22. I was young. Ambitious. Good, Beatrice said, nodding, thinking he was coming to his senses. Focus on that, on what we've built. My father had just died, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. His will was an iron trap. I inherited the empire, but only if I followed his path. That path included a suitable marriage, a union of families, not a choice. Alistair, this is irrelevant. Laura Vance. She was not part of the plan, Alistair said, his voice gaining a strange, distant strength as the 25-year-old wall of denial crumbled. She was a scholarship student. She was brilliant. She read philosophy. She argued with me. Nobody argued with me. She was light. How touching, Beatrice spat. When she told me she was pregnant, Alistair's voice broke, but he pushed on. I panicked. I was a child. My mother, a woman who makes me look soft. She would have destroyed Laura, not just me. She would have had her expelled, ruined her family, blacklisted her from any job. I convinced myself I was protecting her. You were protecting your future, Beatrice insisted, her voice rising with desperation. No, Alistair said. I was a coward. I gave her money, all the cash I had access to. I told her to go. I told her to take care of it. The vile euphemism hung in the sterile, expensive air. And then I built my life. I built this. And I never, ever looked back. I forced myself to believe the complication was gone. Ilara, who had been listening with a frozen, sickening calm, finally spoke. You weren't protecting her. You were protecting this, she said, her arm sweeping out to indicate the billion-dollar view. You threw her away to save your empire. You didn't take care of a problem. You abandoned a person. You abandoned me. Yes, Alistair whispered, the single word a complete and total confession. He looked at Ilara. Yes, I did. Beatrice looked back and forth between them, her face contorted in a mask of pure disbelief. The reality of what was happening finally crashed into her. He wasn't just entertaining this, he was confessing to it. You're insane, she breathed. Both of you. You're going to let this filth destroy us? The Sinclair-Covington merger is the biggest deal of the decade. My father, our families. Alistair, you are throwing away everything for a waitress's sob story. That was the word. Waitress. It snapped Alistair back to the present. The restaurant, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You were at the table. You complained about her. Of course I complained. She was impertinent. She was clumsy. She was... And Alistair cut her off, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. I had her fired. I called Henderson. I destroyed my own daughter's livelihood. For you. She was a liability, Beatrice shrieked. She's still a liability. Alistair, you have to choose. Right now, me, this merger, your entire future, or her. Alistair Covington stood up. The granite was back. The cold, ruthless power that had built this empire. But it was now aimed at a new target. Get out. What? Beatrice laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. Get out of my office, of my life. Alistair, don't be a fool. You can't be serious. The engagement is over, he snarled, advancing on her. The merger is dead. You stand in my building, having publicly humiliated my blood, and you dare to speak to me of contracts. Your blood? Beatrice shrieked, backing away. She's gutter trash. You're choosing her. Over me? Over a Sinclair? A lawyer from my firm will be in touch with your father's firm by the end of the day, Alistair said, his voice cold as the grave. They will discuss the dissolution of all pending agreements. Now leave." "You will regret this," she screamed, her mask of sophistication completely gone, revealing the raw, ugly fury beneath. "You will be a laughingstock. You're a pathetic, sentimental old fool." "Security," Alistair bellowed. Beatrice didn't wait. She turned, her heels clacking on the marble, and stabbed the elevator button. "You'll come crawling back," she spat, "but I'll be gone. We'll ruin you." The elevator doors opened. She gave Ilara one final look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Then she was gone. The doors slid shut, and the office was plunged back into a new, heavier silence. Alistair stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. The Titan had just laid waste to his own life. He staggered back to his desk and slumped into his chair. He looked old. The granite had crumbled away, leaving a tired, broken man. Ilara hadn't moved. She had watched the entire exchange with a cold, distant clarity. She had won. She had brought the giant down. But it felt hollow. "Mum," she said, the word cutting through the silence. Alistair looked up, his eyes frantic. "Yes, Laura. You said hospice." "She's dying," Ilara said, the words brutal. "The nurse called me this morning. She said, 'It's time.' She said, 'It could be today.'" The finality of it hit Alistair like a physical blow. He had just detonated his present, only to find he was too late for his past. He wasn't going to get a reunion. He was, at best, going to get a goodbye. He fumbled for his suit jacket, which was draped over his chair. His movements were frantic, clumsy. The first clumsy movements Ilara had ever seen him make. He dropped it. He swore and picked it up. "Take me there," he demanded. Ilara held his gaze. "Why? So you can fix it? So you can offer her money? Or fly in a specialist? And be the hero?" "No," Alistair said, his voice raw. He clutched the two halves of the locket in his fist, so hard the edges cut into his palm. He couldn't say it. To apologize, to see her, to beg for a forgiveness he didn't deserve. "Take me," he said again, his voice cracking. "Please!" Ilara looked at this man, this billionaire, this tyrant, her father. He was, for the first time, completely powerless. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine. You wanted to see what you threw away? You're about to." The drive to the hospice was a journey through a vacuum. The Rolls-Royce, engineered for silence, glided through the chaotic city streets, insulating its occupants from the world they were passing through. But inside, the silence was a living thing, a suffocating pressure that filled Ilara's lungs and made her temples throb. She sat as far from him as the plush leather bench would allow, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in her lap. She stared out the tinted window, watching the city transform. The gleaming steel and glass monoliths of Midtown, his world, gave way to the brick-and-mortar storefronts of the outer borough. The names on the awnings changed from bespoke designers to check-cashing services and bodegas. This was her world, a world he was invading. What was he thinking? She stole a glance at him. Alistair Covington was not looking at the city. He was staring at his own hands, which rested, perfectly still, on his knees. His face, usually a mask of command and cold calculation, was stripped bare. He looked hollow. The granite had fractured, and she could see the raw, unfamiliar emotion beneath. Was it guilt? Regret? Or just the shock of a perfectly managed life spinning wildly out of control? He had said her name. Ilara. He had tested it on his tongue in the office, as if it were a foreign word. Now in the car, he hadn't spoken at all. Perhaps he, too, was drowning in the unreality of it. The woman he had insulted, the mediocrity, he had casually destroyed was the only living legacy of a woman he once claimed to love. Alistair, for his part, felt like he was floating. The car was moving, but he was not. He was trapped in the lobby of his building. In that moment, she had shoved the half-locket in his face. Laura Vance. My mother. The name he had buried for 25 years, a name he associated with the sharp, sweet scent of lilacs on a university quad, with secret meetings in off-campus apartments, with the only genuine, reckless passion he had ever allowed himself. He had forced himself to believe the lie. He had given her money, told her to handle the problem, and in his ambitious, cowardly mind, the problem, and the pregnancy, had simply ceased to exist. He'd built his empire on a foundation of willful ignorance, and now the foundation was dust. The problem had a name, Ilara, and she had her mother's eyes, and his jaw, and Laura. Laura was dying. He wasn't driving to a hospital. He was driving to a deathbed. The sheer, banal horror of that phrase felt like a physical blow. He, Alistair Covington, who could move markets and shatter rivals with a single phone call, was utterly, pathetically powerless. The car finally glided to a stop in front of St. Jude's Mercy Hospice. It was a low, unassuming brick building, clean but visibly lacking the endless funding of the wings he had endowed at more prestigious hospitals. His driver, a man trained to be invisible, opened the door. Alistair stepped out and felt the difference immediately. The air didn't smell of conditioned, filtered wealth. It smelled of disinfectant, floor wax, and something else, something heavy and communal. It was the smell of sickness and waiting. Ilara strode ahead, her cheap blazer a stark contrast to his $1,000 coat. She knew this place. She pushed through the double doors without hesitation. He followed, feeling like a giant, clumsy trespasser. The lobby was painted a pale, institutional green. The fluorescent lights hummed a weary, buzzing tune. A woman with a kind, tired face sat behind a laminate desk. Mrs. Petrov. Ilara, honey. The nurse's eyes were full of a deep, professional pity. She stood immediately. You got here. I'm so glad. She's been agitated. Asking for you. She's not very lucid, I'm afraid. The doctor was just in. Her voice trailed off as she took in the man standing behind Ilara. She saw the suit, the car through the window, the aura of power that clung to him like expensive cologne. Her eyes flickered back to Ilara, full of questions. He's with me, Ilara said, her voice flat. We're here to see my mother. Laura Vance. Of course, Mrs. Petrov said, her professionalism snapping back into place, though her gaze lingered on Alistair. Room 2B, just down the hall, I'll be right here if you need anything. Anything at all. Alistair felt a sudden, absurd urge to flee, to run back to the car, to the safety of his office, to a world where this wasn't happening. But Ilara was already walking. He had no choice but to follow her down the polished linoleum corridor. He heard it before he saw it, the rhythmic, shallow rattle of labored breathing. Room 2B. The door was ajar. Ilara pushed it open. The room was small, cramped. There was a plastic guest chair, a small crucifix on the wall, and a single bed, surrounded by the cold metallic scaffolding of medical machinery. And in the bed, lost in a sea of white pillows and thin blankets, was a woman. Alistair Covington stopped dead in the doorway. His heart seized. This was not Laura. The Laura he knew was 23, with hair like black silk, a laugh that could shatter glass, and a fire in her eyes that matched his own. The woman in the bed was a pale, skeletal echo. Her skin was a translucent grey, her hair thin and brittle. Her closed eyelids were purple, papery. This was what 25 years of struggle looked like. This was what he had done. "Mum?" Elara whispered. She moved to the bedside, her anger dissolving into the familiar, gentle motions of a caregiver. She brushed the thin hair back from her mother's damp forehead. "Mum, I'm here. I'm right here." Laura's breathing hitched, her eyes fluttered, then opened. They were milky, unfocused, clouded by medication and the fog of her encroaching death. "Elara, my girl," she breathed, her voice a dry rasp. I was dreaming. Such a cold dream." Her eyes drifted past Elara, toward the tall, dark shadow filling the doorway. Her gaze, which had been lost and wandering, suddenly sharpened. It was a jolt of pure, terrified recognition. "No," she whispered, trying to pull her hand from Elara's. "No, he's here, the cold man, from the dream. He's here." "Mum, it's okay," Elara soothed, her own voice breaking. It's just Alistair," Laura breathed. The name was not a question. It was a statement, a final, impossible fact. Alistair felt his legs unlock. He took one step into the room, then another. He was an anchorite walking to his execution. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his hands clenched so tightly his nails were biting into his palms. He couldn't speak. He could only look at the ruin he had made of this woman. Laura's eyes, with a final, shocking surge of adrenaline and life, cleared. The fog vanished. She was there, she was present, and she was looking right at him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hateful. She just looked impossibly, devastatingly tired. "You came," she whispered. The words held no surprise, no welcome, just acceptance. Alistair's throat worked. "Laura." The name was gravel and glass. He couldn't say anything else. You kept it," she murmured, her gaze falling. Alistair's hand instinctively went to his pocket. He pulled out his keychain, the polished, pristine half of the heart. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely unclip it. He choked out. I never took it off." Elara watched, her heart a stone. This was it, the ghost story of her entire life, playing out in real time. "Why?" Elara's voice was sharp, cutting through the sacred, awful silence. "Why did you keep it?" Alistair looked at her, startled. He had almost forgotten she was there. "You threw her away," Elara pressed, the tears she'd held back now streaming down her face, hot and angry. "You threw us away, but you kept this cheap piece of silver as a souvenir." "Elara, don't," Laura whispered, her fingers weakly clutching the blanket. "No, Mum, he's here. He's finally here. He needs to answer." Elara turned her full, burning gaze back to Alistair. "I served you wine. You called me mediocre. You had me fired. Did you know? Did you look at me and see her? Or were we so replaceable that you never even saw the resemblance?" "No." Alistair's voice was a raw bark. I didn't know. I swear to you, Laura, I never knew You thought what?" Elara advanced on him. "That the complication just vanished. You paid your money and wiped your hands clean." "I was a coward," Alistair said, his eyes finally meeting Elara's. And then he looked back at Laura, a desperate, 25-year-late confession pouring out of him. "I was a child. I was terrified. My father was gone. My mother. She would have destroyed you, Laura. She would have ruined your family. I thought I was protecting you. I gave you all the money I had. I told myself I was giving you a new start." "A new start?" Laura whispered, a small, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Elara rushed to help, holding a cup of water to her lips. You gave me exile," Laura managed, her voice strengthening for a moment. "I used that money. To have our child. To run. To hide. So your mother wouldn't find us. I was so scared, always." "Laura," Alistair said, and the name was a wound. He stumbled forward, finally, and collapsed into the plastic guest chair. He was no longer a titan. He was just a man, undone. I'm sorry. I am so sorry." "Shh." Laura's eyes were so clear. It's too late for sorry, Alistair. So much time." "What can I do?" he begged, the words he used to command markets now a pathetic plea. "Anything. Money. Doctors. I can fly you anywhere. Germany, Switzerland. There are specialists. I can fix this." A faint, sad smile touched Laura's lips. You still think you can fix everything. You can't fix this." Her gaze shifted to Elara, who stood trembling, watching the man who was her father weep into his hands. "But she," Laura breathed, her energy visibly fading. She's wonderful, isn't she?" Alistair looked up, his face wrecked. He looked at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a clumsy waitress, not as an insolent employee, not as an inconvenient revelation. He saw her. She's like your fire, Alistair," Laura whispered, her voice growing fainter. That stubborn will. But she has my heart. She's good. She's so good." "Laura," Alistair said, reaching out. He took a frail, paper-thin hand. It was so cold. He tried to rub warmth into it. Don't leave, not now. I just found you." You didn't find me, Alistair," she said, her eyelids fluttering. You were brought here. By her." Her eyes found Elara's. My sweet girl, don't let his world poison you. Don't let the anger eat you. It's too heavy. Let it go." "I can't, Mum," Elara sobbed, gripping her mother's other hand. "I can't. Look what he did. No, it's done." Laura turned her head, her last bit of strength, to look at Alistair one final time. "See her, Alistair, for me. Truly, see our daughter." "I see her," he whispered, his tears dropping onto their joined hands. "I see her." Laura Vance smiled. It was a small, peaceful, heart-breakingly final expression. She squeezed Elara's hand. Her gaze, still fixed on Alistair, softened, and the light that had surged back into them simply went out. Her hand went limp. The shallow, rattling breath stopped. The small room was plunged into an absolute, deafening silence. Elara's breath hitched, a gasp of pure, primal denial. "Mum! Mummy! No! 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 No!" The heart monitor beside the bed, which had been beeping a slow, unsteady rhythm, seemed to pause. And then, with electronic finality, it released one long, unbroken, high-pitched tone. Beep! The sound shattered the silence, a digital scream that confirmed the unbelievable. Elara let out a raw, keening wail. It wasn't a cry. It was the sound of a soul tearing. She collapsed forward, burying her face in the thin hospital blanket, clutching her mother's hand to her cheek. "No, please, no, don't leave me, please!" Alistair Covington was frozen. He was still holding Laura's other hand. He stared at her peaceful, empty face. He had arrived just in time to watch the only woman he had ever truly loved, the only person who had ever seen him for who he was, slip through his fingers. He had found her and lost her in the space of 10 minutes. The door burst open. Mrs. Petroff rushed in, her face grim, followed by a young resident. "She's flatlining," the nurse began, then stopped when she saw the scene. She saw Ilara's heaving shoulders. She saw the billionaire, Alistair Covington, weeping silently, holding a dead woman's hand. Mrs. Petrov quietly reached over and silenced the wailing monitor. The sudden return to quiet was even worse. I'm so sorry, Ilara, the nurse whispered, putting a hand on her shoulder. Ilara didn't respond. She just sobbed, her body shaking. Alistair finally let go of Laura's hand. He stood up, his legs unsteady. He looked from the daughter he had tormented to the woman he had abandoned. He had spent his entire life acquiring things: buildings, companies, power, people. He was a collector of valuable assets. And in this small, sterile room, he was surrounded by the wreckage of the only two things that had ever truly mattered. The reckoning was complete. He had everything, and he had absolutely nothing. In the end, Alistair Covington had all the money in the world, but he was bankrupt in the things that mattered. He had gained an empire and lost a daughter in the same breath. Ilara, on the other hand, had lost her mother, but she had finally gained her freedom. Freedom from debt. But more importantly, freedom from the anger that had defined her. She walked away from billions, choosing instead to build a life on her own terms, honoring the memory of the mother who had sacrificed everything for her. The story of Ilara and Alistair is a powerful reminder that our choices, especially the ones we make in fear and ambition, echo for decades. What did you think of Ilara's final decision? Was she right to walk away? Thank you for joining us for this story. If you were moved by Ilara's journey, please show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to share this video with someone who appreciates a story of justice and poetic irony. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and we can't wait to see you in the next one.